Okay, we've got the lapping done. We've got the scope marked with tape, so we know where we need to set that up and have it aligned already for the eye relief for the shooter. So that's what the tape is for. You just put it in there and it's just that simple. That's in, lined up, and ready to go. Now I still have the tape on my rings, on the top of my rings, so I know which one goes in front and which direction it has to face, so that I know all that lapping that I just did is not going to be a complete waste. I put those on there, make sure that my tape is where it needs to be, and for now I'll just tighten those down by hand just until they just make contact. So all you want is just enough contact that you can spin the scope, and when you let go of the scope, as you're spinning it and rotating it to level it, when you let go, you want it to stay where it is. You don't want anything tighter than that, because then you'll mar the finish on the scope, but you want to make sure that when you do let go, it does in fact stay right where it is. Now again, as I tighten these down, I want to make sure that the gaps on both sides are even as possible, because I don't want to go through all the effort of tightening these down and then end up having one side obviously higher than the other, which will create pinch in the scope, which makes all that lapping that I just did, all that lapping and aligning, a waste of time. So I try to get those as even as possible as I tighten them down. Like I said, I want to make sure that they're tight enough that I can still rotate the scope. That one's a little bit too tight. I want to be able to effortlessly rotate the scope, but when I let go, the scope stays in place. That's how tight you want it. Now the level is designed for bolt action. With a bolt action, you open the action. This little magnet sets on the race rails, inside the bolt raceways on the rails. That magnet holds it in place. It sticks out to the side where you can see it. This sets on top of the scope, and you align them both. With the 597, we don't have that luxury. What I have found on the 597, which has served me very well many times in the past, is the front sight ramp with the sight removed. We already know that my scope rings are lapped and aligned, so that they're going to be straight in line with the barrel. So I put this on that, and if you notice, let me get this leveled out a little bit. If you tip this, that bubble goes off level. So I put it on there and then rest it up, push it up against the front of the scope bell, so that the straight edge on this portion of the level, which I've checked with the square to be square with the back portion of the level. This is square, this is flat. I put the magnet on there, flush it up against the scope, and use that as my level. And just make sure that the rifle is in there nice and level. Now it doesn't have to be perfect, as long as it matches the other one that will go on top of the scope. As long as the two match, doesn't matter exactly where the bubble is. Some people I know actually rest that bubble on one of those lines on purpose, just so they can, like, they'll rest the bubble against this line and then put the bubble on top of the scope against the same line, just so that they don't have to worry about how closely it's centered between the lines. Like I said, I've used this technique before on Remington 597s and it works pretty well. There's a method that I'll probably also videotape where I go out to the range and mechanically check level by shooting rounds at a T-shaped target and adjusting the scope and shooting more rounds at that same T-shaped target. And so far I've not had to make adjustments on my scope based on the findings of that trip to the range on any of the 597s that I've done using this method. looks pretty good. That's not exactly perfect, but that's pretty good. But what you'll see is as you tighten these screws down, that will tip some anyway. So you can use that to do the fine-tuning on where you want those rings. Now at this point I like to go down and make sure that everything is snugged down just to the point of making contact before I actually start putting torque on them. Make sure that all of my screws are making contact. If they're already making contact, it makes it a lot easier to keep that bubble from floating around while you tighten these down. In the torque specs on an aluminum set of rings, which is what I've got here is aluminum rings, is 10 to 15 pounds. For steel rings is 15 to 20. I'll put these right at 15, which, like I showed you earlier, is the bottom of that red line on the 10 mark. Right there is where I'm going to torque them down. Now, if you notice, there is no Loctite on these yet, because I want to get this thing torqued down properly and aligned properly before I start worrying about Loctite, which is why I like the rings that have 4 screws instead of the ones that have 2 screws. Because after I get them torqued down, I can go back and take these out one at a time to add Loctite and not have any issues with it coming out of alignment while I'm taking these screws out one at a time. So far this is going really well. The scope is not tipping while I tighten these down. That says a lot about how well they're aligned, the rings. Because sometimes as you tighten this down, as it pulls down tight, it'll actually rotate the scope within the ring. And I am not having that issue today, which is a good thing, which means this will go fast and easy. Okay. Okay, those are all tightened down to spec at right about 15 pounds. Take my levels off, give it a visual confirmation. Visually that confirms that it's good to go, which makes me very happy. Now at this point what I will do is I will take these screws out. I won't make you watch me do the whole thing. But I will take these out one at a time so that there are still 7 others holding this in place, so I know that me taking out this one screw is not going to affect the level on the scope. And I always do this methodically, same way every time. I do it counterclockwise for some goofy reason, but I start with the one directly in front of me. That way I know which ones I have and which ones I have not added Loctite to. And I go counterclockwise around until all 4 of them are done, and then I will go to the other ring on the rifle. Now I won't make you watch me do all those, but once you get all of those done, your scope is set. And you can remove all your tape. Once those are all Loctited and tightened down to specs, remove the masking tape, which as you can see doesn't leave any residue. The electrical tape that I used for this part leaves a little bit, but cleans up really easy. It's also what I use when I do pillar bedding jobs. I do what's called stress-free pillar bedding jobs, and I use electrical tape as my holder instead of rubber bands. Now the only thing I have left to do is finish cleaning it up and some engraving that I promised my daughter I would do, which will get filled in with pink tape, and it is finished. That is the 597, all of the upgrades that I do on the 597, and a scope mount using the Wheeler scope mounting kit.